The story I'm about to tell happened to me about 10 years ago when we first moved into our house. We live out in the countryside in a small, remote neighborhood. I have a job in the city, so it takes about an hour to commute to work. But I never really minded it. I liked the idea of having some privacy to think in the car and play any music I wanted. Also, I wanted my kids to grow up around clean, fresh air, so the drive was worth it to me. I typically would leave work late at night when it was already getting pretty dark. I'm a realtor, so usually after a day of showing houses, I have some paperwork to finish. Sometimes it means I'm not headed home till 9 or 10 o'clock at night. The road I take to get home is really rural. It has no street lights and is surrounded by forest on both sides. I always had to rely on my headlights to help get me home. One night, I was on my way home when off in the distance I could make out a group of elk running across the street. They were plentiful in this part of Pennsylvania and not unusual to see them in the woods. But this time, as I got closer to the spot where the elk had passed, something huge ran in front of my car, so fast that I could barely get a look at it. It looked like it might have been a bear, but moved faster than any bear I had ever seen. The movement made me jump in my seat, turning the steering wheel and swerving the car into the ditch on the side of the road. My head jolted forward on impact and hit on the steering wheel. The windshield had also cracked on impact, and I lifted my hand to check out my head and felt blood running down the side of my face. But otherwise, I felt okay for the most part. I lifted my head to look in the rearview mirror to check out my face, and that's when I saw it. Standing behind my car, back up in the middle of the road on two legs. The body was sort of like a man, but covered in dark hair. But it had the face of a wolf. It was huge, and with me being down in the ditch, it loomed over the car in the moonlight. The creature took a few steps towards the car and then stopped, as if it had heard something in the woods. It lifted its head and sniffed the air, then took off in the direction of the elk. I got out of my car and looked around. I wasn't sure what I had seen, or if I had even really seen it. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't husky like a bear. It was lean, and it didn't make a sound. Until I heard the screams, followed by a powerful howl. But this howl was different somehow. It wasn't like a wolf's howl or a canine howl. It was higher pitched. If I wouldn't have just seen these animals, I would have thought it was a human screaming. On this section of road, I didn't have any signal on my cell phone, and I wasn't exactly sure how to explain what I had just seen. The ditch was deep and muddy, which made it difficult for the tires to pull out. After trying for a bit, I got out of the car and realized it just wasn't happening. I had just dug myself deeper in the mud trying to get out. I waited around for a while to see if a car might drive by, but when none came, I decided to walk home, thinking that in the morning I could just call a tow truck. I was only about 5 miles from home, which in the car was about 10 minutes, but I still had an hour, at least, of walking. While I was grabbing some stuff from the car, I looked behind me in the direction the animals had run. It's not like I was going to follow them, but for a brief moment it looked like something was staring at me. 2 bright amber dots shining back from the bush. I took a deep breath and focused on making my way home, praying that a car might come along, even on this backcountry road. Thankfully, I had brought a flashlight with me, so I was able to use that. I hadn't gotten far when I heard rustling and saw movement in the bushes along the side of the road. I shined my light in that direction, but the movement stopped. Now I started to get spooked, and I sped up my pace. It wasn't long until I started to hear the bushes move again. and then out of nowhere, a scream. Before I could turn to look in the direction, an elk ran past within inches of me, almost knocking me to the ground. I lost my balance and stumbled backwards as the dog-like creature ran past me with its eyes focused and its mouth drooling. It was tracking the elk. Within seconds, I heard the elk scream, followed by aggressive ripping sounds. I started to run as fast as I could. I heard a loud howl behind me and at the same time saw headlights approach. I jumped into the middle of the street and flagged down the oncoming car and asked the driver to please take me home. The man, who looked to be in his 60s, said that it would not be a problem. He was headed in that direction anyway. And what was I doing out here anyway this late at night? I explained to him what had happened, that I had swerved to avoid hitting an animal and ended up in the ditch. He seemed interested and started asking me questions about the animal. I was hesitant at first, but then decided to explain exactly what I had seen. A big, hairy, dog-like animal standing on two back legs with a high-pitched scream that sounded human. The man listened quietly. I thought for sure that he would think I was drunk or had a concussion or something. But instead, when I was done, he had his own story to tell. When he was a boy, he grew up on a farm. Cows, pigs, chicken, horses, the whole 9 yards. One night his father went out to check the barn, looking into screams that the animals were making inside. With his shotgun in his hand, his dad slipped open the barn door and found a massacre. 2 cows and 3 horses had been ripped to shreds. But the most horrifying thing he saw was a wild creature looming over one of the bodies. He said it was beast-like, with fur all over its body and long fangs, but also human-like, standing on its back legs with a lean, muscular body. His dad fired 2 shots in the air, and the dog-like creature ran out of the barn, smashing through the brush and the trees. They never saw it again. The man told me that in these parts, every so often, there are sightings of a beast that's out to kill, and that my story wasn't the only story he's heard about a dog beast that disappears as soon as someone sees it. He said it's only a matter of time until it comes again. Before I became a teacher, I had a short-lived career as a park ranger. I'd grown up in a heavily forested area and had been an avid hiker and camper, so it had seemed like it would be a fun and easy job. Right after college, I got hired by the National Park Service and had a brief placement in Utah before being relocated to Tennessee, specifically the Smoky Mountains. It was a beautiful area, and I was looking forward to spending summer there. Instead, I got the summer of hell. It started out well enough. As a newbie, I was doing a lot of patrolling and routine safety checks, which was fine by me. I got to roam around the gigantic park, sometimes going hours without seeing anyone. A few weeks in, I got the first weird call. A family had reported animal tracks all around their site. It wasn't a big deal. All parks have some wildlife. But when I got there and saw what I saw, I thought one of the other rangers was messing with me. I thought that maybe it was a hazing thing for the newbie, me. There were tracks, but they were weird. They definitely weren't canine or bear. They were human-shaped, but huge, and with claws at the ends. I checked out the area and took some pictures, and then helped the family get to another campsite. I turned the pictures into my boss, expecting her to laugh and give up the joke. But instead, she was pissed. She thought I was the one playing the joke. I asked her to come out to the site with me, but by the time we could get out there, rain had washed away the prints. 2 weeks later, I got another call. This one was worse. The campsite had been completely trashed. The tents were shredded and everything destroyed. Luckily, the campers hadn't been there at the time. This camp was in a grassy area, so there weren't any footprints, but I did find some light brown tufts of fur on the ground. This time my boss saw the destruction herself, but she marked it in the books as a bear attack. The fur didn't look anything like a bear's, though. It was so much longer. Finally, in early August, I got a call about a lost pet. A young couple had been walking their dog, and it slipped its collar and took off into the woods. They were devastated. A few of the other newer rangers and I got picked to head into the woods and find the dog. We broke off into pairs, knowing that going too far off trail was dangerous. I was with Brian, a decent guy I had sort of become friends with in the last 2 months. We walked for hours, doing our best to cover our area. We whistled and called out, but didn't see any sign of the dog. There were 2 hours left of daylight, and we hadn't gotten any other pressing calls, so we agreed to stay out until dark before going back to the parking lot. As the sun started setting, we turned around and made a beeline for the nearest trail. We still had maybe 20 minutes or so until we got to the trail, and then we would have another 15 minutes on the trail itself. We felt bad about not finding the dog, but there was nothing else we could do. Halfway to the trail, we started hearing noises, growling sounds, a low howl. The missing dog was a lab. They didn't howl like that. We grabbed our bear spray, hoping it would work if we needed to use it. It was almost dusk, so inside the forest it was getting difficult to see. We looked around, but couldn't identify the source of the sounds. We kept walking, hoping to leave whatever it was far behind. At the same time, Brian and I noticed an odd-looking tree. It looked like it had been mauled, huge scratch marks and missing branches. Not unlike what a bear would do. I pulled out my flashlight and looked around the base of the tree. There again were the huge footprints, and they weren't a bear's. They were just like the ones I had seen months ago. They were huge, but human-like, narrow, with claws at the end. This time, though, someone else was seeing them with me. Brian's eyes got huge, and he started swearing. We were suddenly very aware that we were alone in the forest, and it was nearly dark, and we were still far from help. We picked up our pace, going as quickly as we could in the twilight. We kept hearing the crashing and grunting sounds, but kept moving. Twice I saw a dark shape run past, but the trees made it impossible to see what it was. It was large and tall, which was concerning, to say the least. We were nearly running as we approached the trail, or where we thought the trail was. We had to be within yards of it when the creature barreled out of the woods and crashed right into us. I had a glimpse of a dog-like face before it knocked me into Brian, and we went tumbling down the slope together. We rolled for seconds before hitting a tree. I looked back up the hill to get a better look at what had come at us. Staring down at us with glowing eyes was a creature I only thought existed in people's imaginations. It continued staring at us and growling as we locked eyes. Drool was dripping from its mouth, which had me petrified. Brian was frozen too, staring at the creature with its dark, matted fur towering above us. Then, in the next second, it took off into the woods. Finally, I snapped to and grabbed a large branch for a weapon, and Brian and I limped out of the forest, bruised and sore. It was well past dark by the time we got to the parking lot. The other rangers were waiting for us. They were worried and asked why we were so late. Under the lights, they could see that we were totally scraped up, and we explained what had happened. Before they could even respond, I showed them the shallow claw marks on my shoulder where the creature had hit me. I told them it was some kind of a wolf, or a dog, walking upright because I had no idea how else to describe it. Even though I had Brian backing me up, no one believed us. My boss was just pissed at me again and threatened to reassign me. Instead, I quit. I'd had enough of whatever the hellish monster was roaming in those woods. Coincidentally, the missing dog was never found.